Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into a specific slice of the radio world.
That's right. Amateur radio activity in April 2025.
Yeah, we've gone through our notes for that month, pulled out the key info for you. Think of it as your, streamlined guide to what was really happening on the airwaves then.
Exactly. We've basically distilled it down.
We've focused on what seemed most important, right?
Pretty much. We identified three main areas that, really paint the picture for April 2025.
Okay, what are they?
Well, first, there's the whole drive to connect with rare spots, the de-expeditions. Always exciting.
Definitely.
Second, the, let's call it the roller coaster of solar activity and how that affected radio propagation.
The sun always keeps things interesting.
Doesn't it just? And third, the big community events, special stations, contests, that kind of thing.
Got it. So the goal here is to give you a solid, concise understanding of what was buzzing in the ham radio world that month.
Precisely. A clear snapshot.
Okay, let's unpack this then, starting with de-expeditions. These are, they really capture the imagination, don't they?
They absolutely do. It's all about the adventure, heading to sometimes really remote or less activated places.
All just to get on the air and make contact with other hams. It's that thrill of chasing those distant signals.
And looking back at April 2025, what's interesting is the mix of destinations. You see some really sought-after island groups, the rare ones, but also locations that were probably good bets, logistically speaking, for that time of year. So it's a blend of chasing rarity and, practical planning.
Makes sense. So first up, we noted PZ5IP in Suriname. They were active April 1st to 7th.
Yeah, it was PY8WWW, PZ5JW, and DL8TG on 40 through 10 meters.
Moats.
CWSSB and digital. And the key detail for many chasers, Propagation Island. That's IOTA SA092.
Okay, IOTA, Islands on the Air. You mentioned these island groups are a big deal. Why exactly? Remind us.
Right, so the IOTA program is basically like a catalog. It recognizes contacts with different island groups worldwide, and some islands, maybe because they're hard to get to, or politically tricky, or just don't have many hams active.
They become rare.
Exactly, they become highly prized entities to contact. Getting a variety of IOTA groups is a major goal for lots of operators, leads to awards and, bragging rights. So activating a less common one, like SA092. That gets people excited.
Okay, that puts it in perspective. Good context. Then almost immediately after, April 2nd to 10th, we had JD1 from the Ogasawara Islands.
That was the Toshiba Fuchu Amateur Radio Club. And talk about covering the bands.
Yeah, 80 meters all the way up to 2 meters. That's a huge range.
It is. And CWSSB plus the very popular FT8 digital mode from Chichijima and Hahajima Islands. Quite an effort.
How does an operation like that differ maybe in its aims from the Suriname one?
Well, a big multi-band, multi-mode setup like JD1 is often about maximizing the number of contacts across, different interests and different station capability, casting a wider net, basically.
Right.
The Suriname team focused more on HF, the traditional long-distance bands. But JD1, including 2 meters, that suggests they were also thinking about VHF, UHF folks, maybe even local contacts within range.
Interesting. Okay, the momentum kept going. EQ7EF in the Maldives, April 3rd to 10th.
IW2NEF on 40 through 6 meters, SSB and FT8 from Filifeo Island.
And then TX7XG French Polynesia, JA1XGI from Fakarava Atoll, that's IOTA OC066. April 9th to 15th, 40 to 6 meters again.
We're seeing a lot of FT8 mentioned here.
Yeah, what's the significance of that? It seems almost standard now.
It really reflects a major trend. FT8 is just incredibly efficient for making contacts, especially when signals are weak, which happens a lot with DXing.
Okay.
It lets operators pull contacts out of noise where, voice or even Morse might just not make it.
Makes total sense for chasing faint signals from far away. All right, the list continues. VP2VI, British Virgin Islands, April 10th to 27th.
So team effort there. DA1DX, DCAN-NIP, DM6EE, DL8LIS, HF, and 6 meters.
And then a shorter one, T88PV from Palau, April 11th to 13th.
Yeah, JA0JHQ on HF. But this one had a specific goal too, right?
Exactly. Participation in the JA International DXCW contest. Great example of combining a trip with a contest.
Absolutely. Kills 2 birds with 1 stone, really.
Yeah.
Activates a rare place and gives contest points, both for the operator and the people contacting them. Smart planning.
And speaking of big efforts, the Galapagos Islands operation, HD8G, April 18th to 26th, that looked, pretty ambitious.
Oh, definitely. A decent-sized team. PY2PT, PY2WS, PY5CC, YT1AD, others too.
And the bands. 160 meters all the way up to 6 meters. They even included 60 meters.
Plus multiple modes. SSB, CW, FT4, FT8, even RTTY. and it's IOTA SA004, a really desirable one.
Covering that much ground, bands and modes, especially 160 meters, that must have been quite the logistical challenge. Suggests a well-prepared team.
No doubt. 160 meters needs big antennas, tough from remote spots. Going up to 6 meters shows interest in VHF too. And all those digital modes alongside CW and phone. They're clearly aiming to give everyone a chance to make contact. A major expedition for sure.
Right. Meanwhile, overlapping with that, April 19th to May 2nd, C5LT and C5R were active from Gambia.
Year Kololi, F5RAV and YU5R on each SCW SSB FT8.
And then towards the end of April, 25th to 28th, E28AM from Thailand.
A multi-operator effort activating Chang Island, IOD AS-125,
Yeah.
E20HQ, HS1JZT, and others. 40 to 10 meters, CW SSB FT8.
And at the same time, April 25th to May 7th, TX9A from the Austral Islands.
Another IOTA OC-152. Team including 9A2NA, 9A3MR, 9A9R, DK8ZZ on HF.
Wow, that's quite a list. Looking at all these, does it tell us anything about maybe geographic hotspots or trends in DXing back then?
Well, definitely a continued strong focus on islands, and all those IOTA activations prove that. We also see activity clusters in places like Southeast Asia and the Pacific, which often have good propagation paths depending on the season. And the consistent use of FT8 alongside traditional modes, it just underscores how important digital has become. It shows a community embracing new tools while still valuing the classic ways of operating.
It really paints a picture of a vibrant global hobby. Okay, so let's shift gears from these intentional DX efforts to something less predictable, propagation.
Yes, the conditions. Always a factor.
And April 2025, well, the sun definitely made itself known.
It certainly did. We saw a period of pretty heightened solar activity, and as you know, that directly impacts how radio waves travel, especially on the HF bands. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good.
Right. Our notes mention a significant burst between April 13th and 16th, a series of 22 M-class solar flares.
That's right. Pretty energetic stuff. And those flares often launch CME's, coronal mass ejections, towards Earth.
And when those clouds of charged particles hit our magnetic field, what's the result?
Geomagnetic storms. That interaction disturbs the Earth's magnetosphere, and that in turn messes with the ionosphere. The layer radio waves bounce off for long distances.
We measure that disturbance with the KFE index, right?
Yes, and in mid-April 2025, it got quite high.
How high?
Peaked at 7.67 on April 16th. That corresponds to a G4 level storm on the space weather scale.
G4. That's classified as severe, isn't it? What does that typically do to HF communications?
Generally, yeah, it's disruptive. The ionospheric layers get disturbed. Signals can become weak, fade out, noise levels shoot up. Sometimes you get complete blackouts on certain bands.
Which bands are most affected?
Usually the higher HF bands suffer most. Think 15, 12, 10 meters. They can just disappear for long-distance paths.
Yeah.
But there can be some interesting side effects, too.
Like the aurora. People were seeing the northern lights further south.
Exactly. Strong storms pushed the aurora to lower latitudes. There were reports from the UK, for example. Visually stunning, of course. But aurora also messes with radio waves in its own way. You can sometimes bounce signals off at auroral E propagation, but the signals are often distorted, sound fluttery, really hard to copy. Beautiful, but tricky for radio.
A double-edged sword. Okay, we also noted effects on the maximum usable frequency, the MUF. What happened there?
Right, the MUF is the highest frequency that'll reliably reflect out the ionosphere between 2 points. During that G4 storm peak, the MUF over a typical 3,000-kilometer path actually dropped below 18 megahertz.
So 20 meters and up became unreliable for those kinds of distances?
Pretty much, yeah. Much less dependable. But it's dynamic. The MUF did recover later, back up towards 21 megahertz as the storm subsided. Things bounced back.
And the overall measure of the sun's activity, the solar flux index, SFI?
That dipped too, which makes sense. It went from about 170 on April 11th down to 148 around the 16th, right when the storm was peaking.
But it didn't stay low.
No, N8AA predicted it would rebound to around 165 by the end of April. So it seemed like a relatively short-lived dip in solar output coinciding with that flare activity.
So faced with these challenging, fluctuating conditions, how did hams adapt? What would they have done?
Adaptability is everything in ham radio. When the higher bands go noisy or dead because of a storm, operators typically shift down.
So the lower frequencies.
Yeah, 40 meters, 80 meters, even 160 meters sometimes. They tend to be less affected by geomagnetic disturbances.
Makes sense.
Plus, experienced operators watch the real-time propagation tools, things like solar data, KBP index forecasts. They look for those brief openings, those moments when conditions might improve just enough to make a contact.
So it's a mix of understanding the science and having the operating skill.
Absolutely. Knowing when and where to listen and how to operate effectively under tough conditions, it's part of the challenge and the fun.
It really is. Okay, let's move to our final piece of the April 2025 picture, the special events and contests. And this month had some really significant celebrations.
It absolutely did. April 18th was a huge day, World Amateur Radio Day, WARD.
Right, commemorating the founding of the IRU, the International Amateur Radio Union.
Exactly. And 1925 was the founding year, so 2025 marked the IRU's centenary. 100 years.
Wow, a century of organized international amateur radio. That's quite something. And the theme for WARD 2025 was pretty forward-looking, too.
Yes, it was entering the next century of amateur radio communications and innovation. Nice blend of respecting the past and looking ahead.
So how did the community celebrate this big 100th anniversary?
Well, the IRU and its member societies worldwide coordinated a lot of activity. A big part was activating special event stations with unique call signs highlighting the centenary.
Can you give some examples of those call signs people might have heard?
Sure, there was SX100 IRU from Greece, LX100 IARU from Luxembourg, P100 IARU from the Netherlands,
Okay.
OZ100 IRU from Denmark, TM100 REF from France, and a whole bunch of ON100 stations from Belgium, and many others around the world too.
So what was the point of working these stations? What did operators get out of it?
It was a way for everyone to participate, make contact with one of these special stations, be part of the global celebration. Many of them offered special QSL cards.
The confirmation cards.
Right, commemorative ones for the centenary. And some were linked to special award programs for the anniversary too. It was a great way to get on the air and mark the occasion together.
A nice community focus. But April wasn't just about celebrations. There are also the usual competitive events, the contests.
Always contests. They're a big part of the hobby for many. Testing skills, station performance, making lots of contacts quickly under specific rules.
And April 2025 had a few different flavors, like the JIDX CW contest on the 12th and 13th. What's JIDX about?
JDX is focused on CW, Morse code. Japanese stations work the world, and the world tries to work Japan. It's a very popular one, always lots of activity.
Okay. And the same weekend, there was also the IGRY Worldwide RTTY contest. RTTY is digital, right?
Yeah, radio teletype.
Yeah.
So that contest focuses on making contacts using RTTY across the HF bands. Different skill set, different equipment compared to CW.
Yeah.
Appeals to the digital mode enthusiasts.
And for the low power fans.
Ah, yes. The QRP RCI Spring QSO party on April 12th. QRP means low power, typically 5 watts or less.
So that's about making contacts with minimal power output.
Exactly. It really emphasizes operator skill, efficient antennas, and, well, patience. It's a real challenge, and there's a dedicated following for QRP operation.
So you had these contests, the big IRU centenary celebrations with special stations, plus all those de-expeditions we talked about earlier. It really does sound like a dynamic month.
Absolutely. April 2025 really shows the diversity of amateur radio. You've got the technical challenge, the global communication aspect, the unpredictable nature of propagation, and that strong community spirit all happening at once.
It covers a lot of ground.
It really does. From chasing rare DX to celebrating history to competing, there was something for pretty much everyone that month.
All right, so here's a final thought for you, the listener. When you think about all this, the ingenuity behind complex de-expeditions, the way hams adapt to solar flares, the celebration of 100 years of innovation, what does it really say about the enduring appeal of amateur radio, even in our super-connected digital age? Maybe something about resilience, community, or just the pure fascination with making contact across the globe, something to mull over.